Hello and welcome. In this video we are going to be talking about 10 terrifying urban legends. Very chilling stories that happened to a friend of a friend. Number 10. Don't answer the phone. Late one night, a babysitter was by herself downstairs after putting the children to bed. The phone rang. And thinking it might be the children's parents, she answered it.
Hello?
Instead of identifying himself, the caller merely breathed heavily into the phone for a few moments. She hung up, but the phone rang again. The babysitter answered it, only to hear the same breathing, followed by laughter. The babysitter was alone in the house with the children and frightened, so she called the operator and asked that the call be traced. When it rang a third time, she heard the same breathing and laughter before the caller hung up. The operator called back almost immediately, frightening the babysitter by telling her that the call was coming from inside the house. The babysitter ran out, while the operator called the police. When they arrived, they discovered that the man had murdered the children and was waiting to murder the babysitter if she came upstairs. Number 9. Flashed from behind. A college student was traveling home from school. As she entered one particularly long, dark stretch of forest, a car that had been following her suddenly raced up close, and the driver flashed his lights. She accelerated in order to pull away, but the car kept pace and again flashed his lights. She accelerated again, but the car behind her kept up and continued flashing his lights. Within moments, the student saw flashing blue lights from an approaching police car. She pulled over to the shoulder and so did the car behind her. She watched as the police car pulled up behind them both. The officer quickly exited his car and then raced towards her. The officer pulled her quickly from the car, and before she could ask what was happening, he ran back to the car and, with his gun drawn, opened the back door and shouted,
"Put your hands up now!"
As the college student watched, a large man holding a knife got out of the back seat of her car. As he was being handcuffed, the man who had been following her told the college student that he was flashing his lights every time the man would rise up from the back seat to stab her. Number 8. The clown statue. A babysitter was working one night at a house filled with clown memorabilia, including multiple statues, kept in one room. While the children were playing in this room, the babysitter became aware of a life-sized clown statue sitting in a rocking chair. It was extremely lifelike and appeared to be following them with its eyes as they moved around the room. Finally, the babysitter became concerned by its presence enough to call the parents and request that it be removed from the room. Upon hearing its description, the mother ordered the babysitter and children to leave the house immediately and head for the neighbors. When they arrived at the neighbors, they spoke again to the mother, who assured them that the police were on their way. Apparently, a mentally ill neighbor had been threatening to murder the family. He had dressed as a clown and was laying in wait for them in that room. Number 7. Glass in the fried rice. A couple had a tradition of ordering Chinese food every Friday night from their favorite local restaurant. One particular Friday night they ordered their usual, which came with a large order of fried rice. By the middle of the night they were both overcome with excruciating stomach pain and severe bleeding. The husband became so concerned that he called for help. 2 ambulances arrived, and as they loaded the husband and wife into the vehicles, they also collected samples of the Chinese food the couple had eaten the night before. Neither the husband nor wife made it to the hospital. They both died of internal bleeding en route. An analysis of the Chinese food turned up fragments of glass throughout the fried rice. A subsequent inspection of the Chinese restaurant revealed that a disgruntled employee had broken a drinking glass, chosen a random batch of fried rice, and poured the tiny glass fragments into the rice. The employee was arrested for the 2 deaths. Number 6. The dead dog. A child who woke during the night would frequently hold her hand out to her dog to lick so she would go back to sleep. One night, she was awakened multiple times by what sounded like a dripping faucet. Each time she awoke, she put her hand down for her dog to lick. When morning came, she went into the bathroom to find out what was causing the dripping. In the shower, she discovered her dead dog hanging from the curtain rod, with his blood dripping into the drain. When she returned to her room, she discovered a note which read, "Humans can lick too." Number 5. The Curse of AmonRa. Some report that the Titanic carried a cursed mummy. An American museum purchased the mummy of AmonRa, and were shipping it from England to the United States aboard the Titanic. The mummy had previously brought grave misfortune upon all who owned it. The Titanic was no exception, for AmonRa's curse brought death to over 1,500 passengers aboard the ill-fated vessel. Number 4. Shipyard Workers warned of disaster. Although the Titanic was an English ship, she was built in Ireland. When the hull numbers were painted onto the ship, the Catholic crew stared in disbelief at the reflection the numbers made on a piece of metal in the shipyard. The numbers, when read backwards in the reflection, appeared to spell the words "No Pope." They quickly warned their supervisors that the ship was cursed, for the devil had put his stamp on the numbers, but they were laughed at and told to get back to work. Later, they wished they'd been more persuasive. Number 3. Amityville Horror. In the 1977, America was captured by the true story of a haunted house in Amityville, New York. The legend of the house, as told in the book The Amityville Horror by J. Anson, tells the story of the Lutz family who unwittingly purchased the haunted house as their dream home in a peaceful Long Island town. They are blissfully unaware that the house was the home of the infamous DeFeo murders. Within days, the Lutz family is terrorized by all sorts of frightening demonic and poltergeist-type activity, including floating red eyes outside of the windows, a pit to hell in the basement, black ooze coming out of the toilets, and a voice that tells them to get out. While it has never been conclusively proven that the story of the Amityville Horror is untrue, subsequent owners of the home have had no experiences in the house, and the Lutz family now says that their story is mostly true. There are a number of experts who believe that the story is a hoax, while a number of others feel that the house is, indeed, haunted. Number 2. Resurrection Mary. Resurrection Mary walks up and down the streets past graveyards all over the United States in her prom dress seeking a ride home. The original Resurrection Mary legend originated in Chicago. In the 1930s, a number of motorists driving down Archer Avenue passed by Resurrection Cemetery and claimed that a young woman jumped onto the running boards of their cars, only to vanish as abruptly as she had appeared. There is a good chance that the legend arose from the real tale of a young woman from the 1930s who had been dancing with a boyfriend at a nearby Chicago ballroom. Unfortunately, the boyfriend was being a boor, so the young woman decided she'd rather brave a walk home in the cold and dark rather than spend another minute with the lout. She was struck by a vehicle and killed while walking along Chicago's Archer Avenue. According to the legend, she was buried in the Resurrection Cemetery in a white dress and dancing shoes. Shortly after the event, reports of her ghostly appearance to passing motorists began to surface. Resurrection Mary sightings in Chicago continued to this day, leading some to believe that Mary is, indeed, a ghost that walks outside of the Resurrection Cemetery. Number 1. The Small Woman in Grey. This story happened on a cold mid-autumn day somewhere in the Midwestern states. Two gentlemen were working in the town's small general store. The store was quiet and no customers were shopping until she walked in. A small frail woman dressed in grey entered the store and proceeded toward the dairy section, saying nothing. She picked up a glass container of milk and, without paying for it or even glancing at the gentleman, walked out of the store. The men, surprised by the woman's thievery, hurried out of the store afterward, but she was gone. A few days later, the incident occurred again. The same small woman dressed in the same grey dress entered the store, grabbed a glass container of milk, and left without paying. Again the men tried to follow after her, but found her nowhere to be seen. After a few weeks, the woman appeared once again. The same small woman, dressed in the same grey dress, entered the store, paid no attention to the men, snatched a glass container of milk, and vanished out the door. The men, slightly more prepared this time, quickly followed the woman out of the store. She hurried down the town's main street and the men found themselves having to run to keep up with her. She hastily turned down a dirt path, just at the edge of the woods. This is where the men lost her. They trekked on further and came to a small cemetery neither of them knew existed. Suddenly, they heard a small noise. Concentrating, they identified it as a baby's cry. The ground from which it was coming from was in front of a gravestone marking the death of a mother and her infant who were buried together. Unsure of what else to do, the men quickly found shovels and exhumed the coffin. The crying became louder as they dug. When they reached the coffin, they pried off the lid and inside found a small, grey-dressed woman with a live, crying infant in her arms and 3 empty glass containers of milk. The poor child was mistakenly buried alive and the spirit of her deceased mother kept her alive until she was found. It would be much appreciated if you could give this video a thumbs up, and if you enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe. Here are some more videos that you may find interesting.